Hi, my name is Norman Mihwe, International Tax Partner from PwC Johannesburg. Today we're joined by Mirumbe Mseti from PwC in Tanzania. So Mirumbe, when we talk to our clients, we always tell them that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for doing business in Africa. Are there any particular challenges that investors that are going into Tanzania should be looking out for?
The first most important one is the capital structure. Here I mean the proportion of loan and equity in terms of funding the business in Tanzania. Within it, there are a number of issues that need to be considered. The first one is the thin capitalization, whereby the domestic legislation in Tanzania contains a provision which restricts interest payments to a related party to an amount which is equivalent to debt to equity ratio of 7:3. The other thing that needs to be considered is withholding tax on payments of interest. Another item that the investor will need to be aware of is the currency in which they are investing. If you're investing in equity and the law requires that you invest in local currency, Tanzanian shillings. So when you want to pull out from the business, obviously there will be foreign exchange differences. The other thing that needs to be considered on the capital structure aspect is the redemption of the capital itself. If you invest in loan, then it's very easy to get your loan back. I mean, the money that you've invested back. But if you invest in equity, there will be challenges as there are processes that need to be followed before you can get your money back. Another aspect is time that it takes to complete regulatory processes, such as registration with relevant bodies. It may take a while to get your registration done. And also, if you are bringing expatriates from outside Tanzania, there will be challenges around obtaining work permit for those expatriates before they can work in Tanzania. And in practice, it takes around 2 to 3 months to get the work permit. The last point that the investor needs to be aware of is the awareness of possible incentives. If you register with Tanzania Investment Center, there are a number of tax and non-tax incentives that you can be granted. Also, if you register with the Export Processing Zone, you may get a tax holidays of up to 10 years.
What about the companies that already have operations in Tanzania? What are the challenges that they should be looking out for?
The first one will be multiplicity of taxes. There are a number of taxes that business in Tanzania have to pay, and this ranges from income tax. When I say income tax, I mean in general direct taxes, indirect taxes, and taxes paid to local authorities. So that multiplicity of taxes increases the compliance costs. The other aspect is the management of installment tax estimates. The law requires that you estimate your installment tax payments 3 months after the commencement of an accounting period, and you make payment by way of installments. And for a year of income, the expectation is that payment will be made in 4 installments. However, the law also allows one to make an amendment to his original estimates if he thinks there will be changes in the results. Now, if there are changes, the last date by which you can make changes to those estimates is the end of the accounting period. Now, there are penalties in the legislation if you get your estimates wrong. In this case, the estimates are expected to be at least 80% of your final tax liability for the year. So it's very important for the new businesses that are coming in Tanzania to take care of that and ensure that they are not being penalized for getting their estimates below the required thresholds. Also, in terms of VAT refund position, an efficient management of VAT refund processes is required. The last thing will be identification of key tax risk areas, for example, transaction with non-residents. So if you transact with non-residents, it's very important to ensure that you manage any tax exposures that are there. If the transactions involves, say, withholding tax, then you ensure that the correct amount of withholding tax has been deducted on time and remitted to TRA. If the transactions involve a vatable item, then you ensure that you include those in your VAT returns. If you do not do that, then you put yourself into a risk of interest and penalties.
From a tax legislation and administration, are there any major challenges in the horizon?
If I start with the legislation aspect, the challenges are more around drafting of legislation, where in practice there's little consultation that is made, and businesses see that as a challenge. So would argue that in future more consultation is made, so that once a legislation has been drafted, there are no many obvious changes. The other aspect is on administration. Tax dispute resolution process tends to take too long, and once you've disputed an assessment, there is a requirement in the law to deposit 1/3 of the tax that has been assessed. Now, once the revenue have obtained that 1/3 tax deposit, they may take their time to resolve the matters, and in practice we've seen matters dragging for a long period, and this really is not helping the taxpayer.
Lastly, there's a lot of talk about the OECD's focus on BEPS. How do you see this affecting tax policy in Tanzania?
Actually, the government has taken a number of measures to address this matter, and some of the measures that have been taken is to introduce transfer pricing provisions. In the Income Tax Act 2004, there's a specific provisions which deals with transactions with the related parties, and also recently there have been an issuance of transfer pricing regulations. So the government is really taking care of that. Also, the Income Tax Act 2004 contains thin capitalization provisions which seek to restrict amount of interest deduction if that interest relates to loans obtained from related parties. In addition to that, under the Income Tax Act 2004, there's a change in control provisions, whereby if you have an indirect disposal of a Tanzanian investment, then that indirect disposal is subject to tax in Tanzania, even if the transaction has not taken place in Tanzania.
Thanks, Murembe. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you found this to be insightful.